Okay, so I want to talk about more about Sartre and about self-negation and nothingness, and I've talked about that a lot before, but I've talked about in previous short videos I did today about how the being for itself, which is a conscious, changing, incomplete, and undetermined being, part of himself is incomplete, and self-negation is a very difficult thing that we all engage in. And negation, being itself, according to Sartre, being is something that has negation and nothingness a part of it. Being is not this whole absolute being where all of it is just being. There's negation, nothingness that seeps into it, similar to the way in which Heidegger characterizes being. Well, the whole thing about it is that being and nothingness, he gives the example of where he's supposed to meet Pierre in the cafe, and he's supposed to meet him at a certain time, and he goes to the cafe and Pierre is not there, so he's realizing a negation of Pierre not being there. So that's a big thing um, that's part of where negation comes from. The realizing of something that is negative, the realizing an absence, and we can sort of realize that in ourselves, that we don't have a meaning, we don't have a purpose in our life, and that's the way that we can self-negate ourselves. How there can be self-negation and nothingness within ourselves, because we have naturally, according to Sartre, we have a natural, undetermined, incomplete nature that is part of us. Part of us is, part of us is actual, but there's a part of us that is incomplete and undetermined. And through that, sometimes we will fill that with nothingness. And the way in which we can do that is by understanding that we don't have meaning, that we don't have a private purpose, and that can lead to states of anguish, because we have no foundational purpose, we have no foundational meaning that is just already there. So why are we here? Why do I exist? And this hints at a lot of who we are as people, and I keep saying that because that's a very inherent part of understanding Sartre, is that he's trying to talk about us, humans, people, and how there isn't a inherent meaning or purpose in us, and how we have to create that for ourselves. And there are right ways to create that and wrong ways to create that. There are ways of creating our meaning which leads to bad faith and anguish, and there are a few specific certain ways of doing that which leads to freedom and a purpose that we have ourselves created, which is good. And nothingness is the fact that nothingness is a very big part of being itself, and in the world, and about how we are incomplete. That's a big way that we can basically fill the void of ourselves with more nothingness, and that kind of causes a lot of problems. Bad faith being one of those things. And bad faith is basically denial of who you are as yourself. It's basically self-denial, self-deception. Sartre talks about how the for itself will try to absorb or even consume the in itself by trying to take on or absorb the whole complete nature of the in itself. And that is one occurrence out of many of bad faith that we can have. And I'll talk more about bad faith and anguish later in a different video. But the fact that there is inherent negation in being itself and in the world, and how we are incomplete, can cause us to basically negate ourselves and have an issue of self negation, and that leads to basically nothingness in ourselves. And that's kind of bad faith itself is also a part of nothingness, in that we are trying to fill ourselves with something. And if we create a meaning for ourselves the wrong way, and we fill ourselves with the wrong thing, that's going to lead to a state of bad faith and also anguish. It's not. It's in other words, it's not going to solve any problems of meaningfulness and purpose at all. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about here. So let's see here. Let's see if I can get to the self-negation, the negation part. The condition on which human reality can deny all or part of the world is that human reality carry nothingness within itself as the nothing which separates its present from all this past. But this is still not all, for the nothing envisaged would not yet have the sense of nothingness. A suspension of being which would remain unnamed, which would not be consciousness of suspending being, would come from the outside consciousness by reintroducing opacity into the heart of this absolute lucidity, which would have the effect of cutting the consciousness in two. And I don't know, I guess I'm trying to explain this better, but I guess it's kind of something that I guess should be read in order to be understood better. I mean, I guess I'm kind of having trouble sort of trying to explain this better than I already have. So I'll move on to a different video about bad faith and stuff. Comment below what your thoughts are. Thank you.